BHM, the Media Project. E for All and E para Todos are focused on entrepreneurs who are building our cities and towns one neighborhood at a time. And E for All needs you. Become a mentor, enlist as an entrepreneur, or work to bring an E for All program to your community.
I'm the Media Project founder, Scott M. Graves, and I'm an E for All mentor. Believe me when I say you already have everything you need to be an entrepreneur. By working with E for All, you will garner the skills, the connections, and the confidence to see your business to success.
Don't think you're ready to be an E for All mentor? Think again. Your business community needs you to step up and contribute in a highly dynamic and meaningful way. Learn more today at eforall.org. The housing crisis gripping the United States is gaining a disconcerting momentum in the Northeast, as it is in many regions of the United States. In this episode, we're speaking with Worcester, Mass. developer Jackson Restrepo regarding the challenges to the housing market in this, the second largest city in New England and one of the fastest growing cities there, as the biotech sector continues to grow in Massachusetts. This is the second in our ongoing series of episodes focused on the housing crisis in the U.S. for Breaking Housing Matters.
The city of Worcester is the second largest city in all of New England. So it is at an important junction geographically and industrially in the history of the United States. And I'm really glad to have Jackson here today. Jackson, how are you doing?
Hey, Scott, how are you? Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great.
So let's dive right in. Give us a bit of perspective on what Worcester, Massachusetts is like right here, right now. As far as the housing crunch goes, and talk a little bit about the greater economy and how that's played a role.
Well, the city of Worcester, it's a very interesting city. It has its roots in manufacturing, and it used to be. For a very long period of time, it's been the second largest city of New England, as you mentioned. But its economy used to be primarily based on manufacturing. It reached its peak back in the 1950s when it reached a population of almost 150,000 people. But over the years, it lost its population over the decades due to what was happening in the 1960s, the whole phenomenon of suburbia, people leaving the cities to live in the suburbs, and the businesses leaving with them. So Worcester went through what I would call the dark ages of Worcester, which sort of came about probably in the 1960s all the way through the 1990s, where each and every year it was losing its population. And it was a grim image of what it used to be in its former glory, again, back in the 1950s.
Yeah, I remember a low point there in the 1980s, about 1980, 1985 or so, that decade, not only from a population standpoint, but you visibly felt in many, many, many neighborhoods, the deindustrialization, the depopulation at the same time of the city.
Absolutely. And just one small correction. Its peak was around 200,000 people, which was its peak in the 1950s. But then came the 1990s, 2000s, and you saw a lot of grassroots efforts coming from the neighborhood associations and also from the government, a very responsible government that came on board, and a lot of stakeholders working together. How do we bring Worcester back? What can we do to make it better? And it was all hands on deck, so to speak. How do we bring in more industries? How do we be more creative to provide people a reason to come back to Worcester, not just to work, but also to live and to play, so to speak. Fast forward 20 years later, now we have a city that's thriving. A lot of people talk about the Renaissance, Worcester's Renaissance. There's more industries. There is the biomedical industry, health sciences industry that are growing significantly in the city of Worcester, and there are other industries that are growing significantly. And for the first time, students, by the way, the city of Worcester has at one point in time had about 10 different colleges, over 30,000 students living in the city.
Yeah.
Now it has about 8 different colleges, great colleges, over 30,000 students living in the city. But you know what? They're graduating and they want to stay for the first time.
And that is the
used to be a
first time
time
for that. Yeah.
There used to be a time that they couldn't wait until they graduated to get the hell out of Worcester, because there's really nothing that welcomed them in Worcester. Now everybody wants to be part of a growing population in this sort of progress that's been happening here. So it's good to be part of all of that myself. So I recognizing this significant growth and having a city that was so welcoming to me from the very beginning. When I was young, my parents are immigrants from South America, Colombia to be precise. They came in here in the 1990s. I was a teenager back then. This city welcomed us with open arms. We have been tenants here in the cool three-deckers. I've known multiple three-deckers because I've lived in them. And living that experience, we loved absolutely every minute of it. I wouldn't go anywhere else. The city is where I belong, the city of Worcester. I've had opportunities to move to other towns, but yet I've chosen to stay here for the long term.
Yeah. And of the triple deckers, this is a city full of triple deckers, right? Again, for those that may not be initiated, describe this vernacular, and also, if you could, just what many people don't realize is there's a pretty wide array of options, right? When you're looking at the old triple deckers. In other words, we were just talking offline for a moment. You have 2,500, 3,000 square foot units of a whole upper middle class houses in the early 20th century, right? And then you also have units that are much smaller, right? But they're all still considered triple deckers. Talk to us a little bit about that architectural vernacular, which is so well defined in the city of Worcester.
So late 1800s and early 1900s, it's when there was an explosion in the population of this city, with immigrants coming from all over the world, but primarily Europe. And they were looking for density. How can we put as many properties under one roof, or as many apartments under one roof? So they figured, hey, why don't we just stack them up, one on top of the other, on top of the other?
That's right.
And the tradition has always been, why don't we have? It's normally the parents, they live on the first floor, and then their sons live on the second floor, and their grandkids will live on the third floor. And most of these properties, the properties that we purchase in particular, I would say about 70 to 80% of the housing stock here in the city was built in the early 1900s. Yeah. Every single one of the three deckers that we own was built in either 1900, 1910, or 1920. And now, so in those days, labor was very cheap. Materials were very expensive. Now it's the other way around. Sure. Now the labor is extremely expensive, and the materials are also expensive these days. But you can get much cheaper materials, relatively speaking. Yeah. And so when you have a labor force, a very skillful or skilled labor force working on these three deckers, the ornamental features that these three deckers have to offer, the woodwork, you could tell that a lot of time we're spent into these, and a lot of talent we're spent into these three deckers. Now it's different. Now it's all about efficiencies. How do we produce, or how do we build something from the ground up using the most durable but cheapest materials and the least amount of labor, because costs have gone up. So it's all about efficiencies and not so much about the looks or the aesthetics of a building. It wasn't like that in the 1900s. Everything was painstakingly beautiful, and it took a long time to get it there. Yeah. As investors ourselves, we try to preserve that as much as possible, within reason, of course. And I absolutely love a lot of things that you would find in a three-decker, certain things that don't exist today. It's a great area to be in, to be honest with you.
So we have the pressures on the housing market in and around Worcester of, burgeoning technology companies that have been moving west, right? Largely because people are seeking housing, but very quickly that created pressures of its own in Central Mass, in and around Worcester. You have a lot of old stock, housing stock, right? That's the majority of the housing stock in the city. Not all of it is of a vernacular that is desirable to everybody who now wants to move to Worcester, right? But there's sheer numbers. I mean, I read a report because until very recently, the market you're in was the market I was in. By some factors, um, whether it's Worcester County or it's just the more immediate environs around Worcester, something like 10 or 15,000 units shy. The region is shy of having enough housing that's anticipated over the next decade. And you eloquently put it earlier. This is being driven by all of this new growth through biotech and other industries that are expanding and either locating or relocating to Worcester, right? Um, so you're there. You've started a development company. You own properties. What are some of the additional challenges as a developer on the ground that need to be mitigated so that we can more rapidly deploy and get to the point, where we have at least, or let me ask a sort of secondary question: are we going to get to a point where we can at least keep pace at some point? Well, what would be the plan to do that?
It would be a difficult thing to do for sure. There's absolutely no doubt that we do have a housing shortage, and the whole nation for that matter. But
Right.
specifically in the city of Worcester, a growing city like Worcester, where development is so difficult to do, unlike some cities in Florida or in the South, where you can just continue to expand outward. In here, you're limited to infill development. There
Yeah.
are no green spaces anymore that you can build on. Best case scenario, maybe perhaps you can tap on a brownfield, which means you're going to have to clean it up. Environmental issues are at stake. So
Yeah.
it just adds an extra layer of difficulty, because the infrastructure has already been built, the cities have already been built. So you're limited to whatever spaces are available out there. In a lot of cases, a lot of property owners developers and property owners have taken upon themselves to buy old dilapidated buildings and turn them into housing, which is a great thing to do.
Mm.
Just a couple of days ago, I was at the Chamber of Commerce um, breakfast meeting, and Governor Maura Haley was in there. She was the keynote speaker, and she said something that I found very interesting. Our shortage right now, housing shortage, is in the hundreds of thousands of houses or households,
Yeah.
or doors that are missing. So at least 100,000 houses that we need. And in Worcester, easily, like you said, Scott, 10,000 houses, maybe even more. And just look at it this way. The US Census just 10 years ago, the Worcester's population was around 210,000. Now it's 225,000,
Really? Wow.
or even more.
Yeah.
And if we're only building on average 5,000 houses or 5,000 doors, and the population in the past 15 years grew by this many, we just do not have enough houses to go around. And obviously, it increases the demand, and there's very little supply. So to answer your question, what can happen as developers or as property owners to make it easier for any developer to build any kind of housing? I don't care if it's luxury housing or market rate housing or affordable housing. We need any kind of housing, because eventually, even if you do build luxury housing, it's going to trickle down to affordable housing. Any kind of housing is better. It's the availability of capital. Banks are their businesses. They're not in it to help the community as much as they tell you they want to do that. They're in it to make money. And if they find an investment, which, by the way, construction is a very risky business to be in, brand new
Yeah.
construction,
Lots of
they
things can go
are,
wrong.
yes, they're going to be very conservative. extremely conservative. So it's making it a lot more difficult for developers to make the numbers work, especially at the rate of inflation that we're in right now. So
In your opinion,
it's a challenge.
where are those sticking points? Like, where's the sticking points in underwriting? If you can wave a magic wand, that would make access to capital work better.
Reserves. Developers need a lot of dry powder, so to speak. They need reserves. Yeah. The bank wants to know, hey, if something is going to go wrong, because this is construction, something will go wrong. Would you have enough capital to be able to sustain those setbacks that you will definitely encounter? Because the last thing we want, this is the bank talking, the last thing you want, Mr. Developer, is for you to come back to me halfway into the project looking for more money, because most likely we're not going to be able to help you. So we want to make sure that you have reserves from the get-go, so when something goes wrong, you can alleviate those setbacks with whatever reserves you have. So a lot of developers, they're putting hundreds of thousands of dollars just buying the land, hundreds of thousands of dollars in soft costs, and they dig themselves into a hole of hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Plus, they have, I don't know how much money they come up with when it comes to reserves, and on top of it, they're asking for even more reserves. Is it a smart move coming from the banks? Absolutely. But it just goes to the additional challenges that developers encounter. And this is the reason why they just go to places where it's a heck of a lot easier to build, like the South, where they're not facing as many challenges. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure they're facing similar challenges when it comes to the financing. But there are less restrictions, perhaps when it comes to the permitting, perhaps when it comes to the infrastructure that needs to be built. Sometimes it's a heck of a lot easier when you're doing that kind of infrastructure as opposed to doing it in infill development type of projects. So you, as a developer, you're always going to go for the path with the least resistance. And if that happens to be Worcester, because Worcester is now a business-friendly environment or a business-friendly city, then by all means, yes. But it isn't just about being business-friendly. It's about all other factors that come into play in something so difficult like construction.
It seems to me that because this problem is national and because this problem is the size that it is, the capacity needed, right? We need to do various things through the financing ecosystem, through the entire ecosystem of development to support any and all developers. So what I mean by that is, it seems to me a healthy environment would have more large scale developers. It would also help to proliferate small independent developers at the same time in cities and towns throughout the nation. Like, in other words, the sheer amount of housing and the housing boom, the construction boom that needs to happen, just so we could even begin to keep pace at some point in the next decade or 2 decades, would have to be, right? This is like the kind of mobilization the United States has simply not seen since World War II. Or since we're talking about building things, maybe since the interstate system, but I don't think that really that doesn't scale the same way. I think it's really like the mobilization for the war, right? So how do we proliferate? We just talked about financing, or one part of financing, but what are the other ways to help proliferate small independent contract? I'm going to guess you are a proponent of small independent developers because you are one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Provide additional incentives to emerging developers, as the state of Massachusetts calls us. There's an awful lot of people there aren't enough of us with enough energy and I guess wherewithal and financial wherewithal to be able to take on a project, on a brand new construction project. My entire life, when I invest in things or in real estate, it's always buildings that already exist, because those are the easiest ones to handle. The building is already there, it's already fully permitted. All you have to do is go in there and you fix it up, you do whatever renovations you need to make, you completely turn it around, you stabilize it, and then you move on to the next property. When it comes to ground up construction, there's a number of risks that you have to assume. So I would say the state needs to continue to provide incentives. It doesn't necessarily have to be money, although capital is the number one and the number two and the number three different things that a developer will need, but also providing a continuing to provide a business-friendly environment, making it easier for developers to go out there and take risks, incentivize small business owners and emerging developers to take on these tasks. It's also very important. Those are the two major ones: capital and incentives for developers.
You have an
big and
interesting
small.
you have an interesting background because you worked for the city, and so I'm wondering what has the experience been being on those two different sides of the developing cycle.
So it would be my opinion when it comes to what the city has done over the past few years, actually over the past couple of decades in the city of Worcester, will obviously be biased. I saw firsthand the dedication and the drive of a lot of the players within the city administration, especially the people in the economic development, which is the economic development office, which is where I worked for almost 10 years.
So you worked for Peter Dunn, is that correct?
I worked with actually Peter Dunn took my job before he became chief financial officer, chief development officer for the city.
Cool.
So right around the time when I was promoted to senior project manager, he took my former job working with small business owners, which is I was a business development officer, best job I've ever had. And then after that, I moved on to work for the Worcester Housing Authority for approximately 4 years. And shortly thereafter, Peter Dunn was moved up all the way up to Chief Development Officer, which is his current role right now.
Got it.
But yeah, going back to what I was saying, the city administration has played a pivotal, critical role in Worcester's renaissance. Absolutely no question about it, especially bringing in the key players, the risk takers. I have one project in particular, and that was City Square.
Sure.
At the time, it was the Galleria or the fashion outlets. So it was the Galleria in the 1980s. I wasn't around then. Then it became the fashion outlets. A lot of money was poured into that project back in the 1990s, and it was rather successful to have a mall, outlets in the downtown.
For those of us that understood the abandoned Galleria of the 80s, it was like a breath of fresh air. It's like finally we can walk through there.
And it was very successful at first.
Yeah.
But then the internet came, and people didn't really have a reason to go to the mall, and Worcester was still carrying the stigma that it was dangerous to hang out in the downtown. So if you're going to go to the fashion outlets, that's the only place you were going to go. You were not going to get out of the building and perhaps patronize a business around the corner. You will never do that. Nobody will ever do that. You just want to hop back in your car and get out of Worcester before you get kidnapped. That was the stigma that people used to carry. And now the stigma is different. People still hold some kind of fear, depending on who you talk about, walking the streets of Worcester. But that perception has certainly improved dramatically. I worked in the downtown for over 15 years, and yes, I'll be the first one to admit that there were one or two occasions where a violent crime happened. I remember one in particular, but that's 15 years. One violent crime that I was able to witness in over 15 years. Other than that, it's been an incredible experience, and it's only gotten better.
Yeah. I would attest to that. I mean, the seeing the vibrant activity that takes place on any given day, people out and about in downtown is great. And 30 years in the making.
Yeah. So you take the fashion outlets, didn't work. It worked at first, but then it just kind of died over the years. It was a slow and painful death, which took many, many years until it finally shut its doors. And then the city and other stakeholders, developers and major investors, including stakeholders from the state and everyone else, they got together and they figured, okay, what do we do with this massive building? How do we reconnect? Because this massive building actually divided the two cities. It divided it from the west from the east, because it actually shut down or blocked off a major corridor, which was Front Street, which basically separated one part of downtown versus another part of downtown. What do we do with this massive thing? Now we need to recreate. We need to come up with something that is going to bring back people into the downtown. So what do? We're going to knock it down, and we're going to be bringing in office space. We're going to be bringing in retail, and we're going to be bringing in residential all at once, because it was kind of a chicken and egg situation. Do we bring in residential? How can we possibly be bringing in residential if there's nothing else for the residents to do? There are no restaurants. There's no activity. There's no night activity.
It is
and vice versa.
It's the seminal challenge of those of us trying to build at whatever scale we're building it. This idea of density and a total ecosystem, right? How do you address a total ecosystem? They happen easily, I'll put that in quotes, organically. But when you get rid of them and now you're trying to do it artificially, not so easy.
No, not so easy. You got to bring it all in at once, and that's extremely costly.
Yeah.
And the developer is not going to want to take that kind of risk unless he or she is, quote unquote, heavily subsidized or assisted by not only the city, but the state. So in my opinion, that and the grassroots efforts in primarily certain neighborhood groups like the Shrewsbury Street Business Association, the Canal District Business Association, and the Neighborhood Association, and many others that I'm failing to remember right now, they're the ones that were bringing in sort of this synergy and putting pressure to city officials to do something about their neighborhoods, do something about infrastructure improvements, provide additional incentives for businesses to start and grow. So it was a cohesive effort coming from multiple stakeholders to really make this happen. So it was City Square. Once the state and the region, if you will, heard about hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on a specific project, then the rest of us just follow, because people just want to get in the path of progress. As a small, actually as a City of Worcester employee, I'm looking at all the stuff that's happening, and I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be not only on my side with working in public office, working in public administration, but also I wanted to be on the other side, buying properties and making those properties better. Buying properties, especially 3-deckers, in need of repair, in need of love, and doing something about it. Refurbishing those properties, bringing them back to their original glory, and bringing in working class families, primarily immigrants or anybody else who wanted to be part of what we were doing. So yes, little by little, I wanted to contribute my own way. And I'm not going to lie, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business owner, and I wanted to be part of the solution while at the same time having something that was going to put food on the table.
Yeah. There's no reason to sound like you're apologizing for that. Until we come up with a better system than the capitalist one we have, this is what we do here, and they're not mutually exclusive. We talk of that's a recurring theme here on this podcast is you can make money and you can do good by your neighbors. It doesn't have to be. These are not mutually exclusive things. In fact, they should be designed that way.
Everybody wins.
So you and I connected over Breaking Housing Matters. That's founder Peter DeCrossel's national initiative, housing initiative. And we're in the early stages of this initiative, right? I'm working on that here in Rutland, Vermont. You and a number of other folks, including our good friend Amy, we connected through Amy Mosher-Berry in Worcester. What about the program do you attracted you to want to be a part of that, and how do you see it actually benefiting people in Worcester?
So when you ask a developer or a real estate investor, because I'm not a developer just yet, I'm a developer in training, if you will, an emerging developer. But when you talk to a real estate investor and you tell them, look, I'm Peter DeCrossel, comes up and says, I'm trying to come up with a fund. It's a nonprofit kind of fund, and where I'm going to be bringing in multiple stakeholders to work together towards the same goal, which is what? To bring in more housing, not just in Worcester, but across the nation. Because we're facing the biggest shortage that this country has ever had when it comes to housing. We're still a country of immigrants. And to this day, people still want to live in this country because this continues to be the land of opportunity. This is still the best thing there is out there in the world. We got to take advantage of that. So somebody comes in and says, we're looking to create a fund. You heard me earlier say or almost complain about the lack of availability of funds or capital to get projects off the ground. And if you have multiple stakeholders, and if I remember correctly, all the stakeholders you put in together in the same room, you put in developers, you put in philanthropists or families with a lot of money to donate for a good cause like housing. You put in the government, you put in the faith organizations, and then finally you put in the banks or the lenders, and you put them all together under one roof, and you say to everybody, this is what we're looking to do. We're looking to raise funds precisely so that we can make it easier for developers to develop, to do what they do best.
Increase their pool of clients.
Yes, as a developer, or again, as an emerging developer, what's not to like?
Right.
We need more capital. More capital is needed in the right places, and that is for construction. The moment you just look at what happened back in 2005, I know this wasn't during the financial crisis. I mean, we did this to ourselves because we did too much of it. There was too much money that was made available, and people went crazy. I was a victim of that. I was only 25 years old, and I was given a loan. And I was given a loan when I never should have been given a loan. I 100% financed with no experience.
See, and
I thought I could make it.
It's interesting you brought that up. You and I are the same age. And I remember I actually had to go 2 hours from where we were buying our first home to find a bank willing to sell us. I'm kidding. A 30-year fixed rate mortgage.
Imagine
everybody that. Local to, so I at the time I had a position that had high standing in that region. Mm-hmm. So a very public position. On top of the fact I was now moving there, right? Because I was raising funds for a cultural institution and felt like I want to live where I'm asking people to invest their time and money, right? I had to go 2 hours outside of there. All of the bankers, even bankers on my board of directors, right? Everyone said, no, you're not going to buy a 30-year fixed mortgage. You're going to get yourself an adjustable rate mortgage. And I'm like, you know how much you're paying me right now. In 24 to 36 months, you're telling me my pay is going to go up 30%, 24%. Whatever I'm going to need. And that you're not going to worry about that because you can sell this house in a year for another $100,000. And I was like, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to put down roots. This gets us into like another realm here. And but I want to kind of focus on BHM, but I am going to ask you one thing before we go back to that, which is, do you feel, I'm of the opinion we can have housing seen primarily as an investment. We can have stable communities. We can't have both. We've created a world where there can't be both.
Yeah.
So you would agree with that? That's a question.
I never saw it that way. So we need, at the end of the day, we need more housing. Absolutely no question about it. But we got to be careful not to overdo it because we end up in another financial crisis like we did in 2007. Right. We need to find incentives, but we need to, when these incentives, these financial incentives are given to someone, it needs to be done in a responsible manner.
Right.
They say that.
That's exactly my point, right? If we proliferate small, independent, localized developers, these are people who have to see their neighbors every day. So they are going to be, as business leaders, the tendency is going to be responsible, right? I'm not saying you can't invest in real estate. I'm saying that when you have things like scaled REITs that own thousands of homes that were previously owned by individual mortgagees, and now those are being rented at very high costs in suburban neighborhoods, as an example, right? Same thing's going on in urban neighborhoods, just slightly different flavor. There's a certain, dare I say, Wall Street mentality to it all that doesn't adapt to real estate and especially residential property without there being a cost to the social stability of neighborhoods,
Right, because when you have Wall Street invest in real estate, which by the way, it's based on what I've heard, about 3% of houses being sold and purchased in the United States is coming from Wall Street. So yes, that does it affect the fabric of a neighborhood? Absolutely it does. If you have a major Wall Street company, or if you have a major developer, major company coming in and buying hundreds of houses in a city, it can have an impact, because one day they may decide to sell because they want to make a profit, and they could care less about the fabric of that specific neighborhood. And now you have a crisis in your hand, because when you have multiple properties flooding the market, then what does it do? It affects the supply and demand equilibrium, and now you have an issue. Now houses are much cheaper, and it's all being controlled by one player. So you do not want that. It's no different than a monopoly. We're kind of talking about a monopoly. We are far from reaching that right now, but it could eventually become an issue, because a lot of developers, developers and a lot of Wall Street players are looking at this as an opportunity to make money. It was no different than the mortgage-backed securities back in 2005, 2006, 2007. They saw an opportunity. Right. At the time. I remember that the vibe was that every American deserves to have a home, and that real estate is never going to come down in value. I remember when I bought my first property,
you're going to sell this house in a year for $100,000. Don't worry about it.
I bought my first property for $206,000, and I sold it for $65,000 5 years later. So you do the math in terms of how I did on it, not very well. So we don't want to get caught up in those things right now. I personally believe that it's an all hands on deck kind of situation. If these Wall Street players can come in and build a lot of housing, by all means, we need to incentivize them to do so. But we cannot overdo it. And also we have to be really careful so that we don't create monopolies as a society. That's easier said than done. The moment you open the floodgates for those players to get bigger and bigger, you cannot stop them. Honestly, Scott, I don't have a solution for that right now. It's more of a, everybody come in here and start building. Everybody start building. Let's not overdo it like we did in 2005 through 2007. But hey, let's be more responsible in making the availability of funds and capital, making it more accessible without giving it to irresponsible, immature, and inexperienced people like I was when I was 25 years old, 20 years ago.
And I just want to say, we're glad that you're out there in the city of Worcester, Wormtown, some would call it. I say that affectionately because it was truly the city that bore me, so to speak, and my friends too, my peers at a time when we were coming up as musicians. It was the center of our cultural life, and then some, for many years. So thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. It is a great city with a lot of entertainment, a lot of awesome, great restaurants. I'm a foodie when it comes to that kind of stuff. I love checking out new restaurants. I love helping with the local economy in any way, shape, or form. I love encouraging others to try different Worcester restaurants. Come back to the city. It's already happening. Be part of what we're trying to do here.
And I love the fact that people continue to move to Worcester from all around the country and all around the world. And it is a center for new immigrants to come to and mix with everybody else that's already been there, whether they be there for a generation or for generations. It's truly an economic engine in that way, and a social engine. And I mean that in the most positive way possible. So it's been a pleasure having you on the show. And it's also, I look forward to working with you on various Breaking Housing Matters issues as well.
Scott, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward for working with you hand in hand with multiple projects coming our way.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com. Welcome, and meet pianist Bertha Hope. She talks about her husband, Elmo Hope, and her CD, Nothing But Love, featuring drummer Jimmy Cobb as part of her ensemble. For more information about Bertha, check out her biography at thehistorymakers.org. Now, enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome to the Jazz Room. I'm your host, Joan Watson-Jones. Thanks for stopping by. Come in, relax while we enjoy great jazz. Each week we present the music of independent jazz artists, as well as those we've grown to love through the years. And yes, of course, the legends. We open this program with pianist Bertha Hope. She is visiting us here in the Jazz Room at Studio 952. Welcome, Bertha.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we're going to talk with Bertha about her CD and her new venture into teaching. Right now, enjoy Bach, Books, Bach. Hello, Bertha. Welcome to the Jazz Room.
Thank you for having me here.
I love your sound, Bertha. Now, we just heard a song called Books, Bach. Now, this is your composition?
Yes, it's based on some very old changes, and if you listen to it long enough, you will hear the changes to a very famous song called Sunny, because you know that it's possible to write your own melody on top of other changes, and the melody becomes your property. The changes are not your property. So I love those changes, and so do about 1,000 other composers. So this is my contribution to those changes, and I named it after my husband who just died, Walter Booker. Books, Bach.
Okay, all right. Well, that's very interesting. Now, tell me about the musicians on this CD. Who are they?
This is a trio CD. I was really fortunate to be able to be one of the disciples, I would say, of Walter Booker in his studio, Boogie Woogie Studios. And I met him in the 80s. And I was introduced by him to a number of wonderful musicians. Jimmy Cobb is the drummer. And Jimmy Cobb and Walter Booker, over a period of maybe 25 or 30 years, were partners playing together for several groups over a long period of time. So they got to be known as the cookers of the rhythm section, really, veterans, and who played together and hooked up very well. So as piano players, as pianists, you have to have a bass player and a drummer who understand and love each other and can give you the drive that you need to float on top of them. So I was fortunate to be able to have Walter Booker and Jimmy Cobb accompany me on this CD and also on the tour that followed to push the CD. It was a wonderful experience.
Yes, yes. Now tell everybody the name of this CD, please.
The name of the CD is Nothing But Love. The title is taken from composer, saxophonist Frank Lowe's composition by the same name. And it features Walter Booker and Jimmy Cobb, and some other compositions of well-known composer artists who are still alive, and that's what I wanted to be able to do, was to play those compositions.
Well, you've segued very nicely into my next question, because I noticed that in this collection of songs on your CD, it's like, I got the impression each one has a personal meaning for you, and that there's a little story behind each one of these songs. And if you could tell us a little bit about each of them, or a little bit about them, I'd appreciate it.
All right.
Because you can mention some of the songs and tell us who wrote them.
Okay. Super 80 was written by Charles Davis. And Charles Davis was a member of a band that Walter Booker put together to play the music of Elmo Hope. And this was really a wonderful experience because Booker wanted to be able to play these songs. And they're not that well known. Elmo Hope was my first husband. He was contemporary to Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk. And so his music has a feeling of the bop era. It's very much right in the piano tradition. In fact, most of it was written more for piano than it was for horns, and we had to do some rearranging in order to play it in another situation. But Charles Davis wanted to be a member of that band, and that's how I met him. And I got familiar with his music, with some of it. This particular song was written for his father. And I thought that was really interesting. He had written a piece for his father, and I was planning to dedicate a piece to my father. And so I included Super 80 in this collection. Then Balm in Gilead, of course, I think it's an old spiritual. My father was a dramatic baritone back in the 20s, and he expatriated to Europe and lived there and worked there for about 15 years during the period of time when Josephine Baker was there, when Jack Johnson was in Europe, when Sidney Bechet was alive and in a band in Europe, James Reese Europe, Noble Sissle, U.B. Blake, Paul Robeson, Roland Hayes, Marian Anderson. My father was a part of that period of time. So he taught me the spirituals that were arranged by Hall Johnson. And at the end of a program of German lieder or Italian bel canto, he never failed to include the Negro, they were called at the time, Negro spirituals, and Balm in Gilead was one of them. So I included that, and I dedicated that to my father. My father was the first person to hire me. When I was 12 years old, he hired me and paid me $7 when I was that was 1948, to play for a church concert where he included these spirituals. I couldn't have been more proud to get my first paycheck from my father.
What a great story. What a great story. Now, what I'd like to do is you talked about Balm in Gilead. And, I was going to ask you about your background in your childhood, and we have a lot to talk about a little later. We have a lot in common.
Okay.
And
Good.
I'll just leave that for everyone else to think about and wonder about, and they can even ask about later. But you and I have a lot of in common in our childhood background.
That's a wonderful thing to hear. So we'll
Yeah.
have something to talk about over coffee.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But right now, what I'd like to do is play for everyone Balm in Gilead. And I have to admit, when I first heard this on your recording, it reminded me of the recording that I heard that I've had of Paul Robeson that's been in my family on a 78 forever. So I just wanted you to that's one of the reasons I picked this song.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, he was certainly in my background. We heard a lot about Paul from my father.
I understand. So right now, let's listen to Balm in Gilead. You are in the Jazz Room. I'm your host, Joan Watson Jones. You just heard our guest, Bertha Hope, on piano and singing Balm in Gilead. Now, Bertha, you mentioned when we first talked that you've started teaching. Please tell us about this.
Well, I guess that was a little misleading because I have taught before. I was a Jazzmobile teacher for 15 years with their Saturday system. And I did early childhood teaching and taught those children all about jazz and brought tapes in while I taught pre-music and pre-art through pre-reading and pre-writing and pre-math through the arts. And I've had some experience doing that. But now I am really developing a curriculum for teaching. Right now I'm involved with a school in Brooklyn, the Ifitayo Cultural Center, and it has a wonderful array of classes for young people on Saturday. It's a Saturday school. They can be there all day Saturday learning anything from capoeira to drumming, trap drumming, diaspora drumming, piano, sculpture, graphic arts. It's a great program. So I'm developing a curriculum tailor-made for that particular situation, as well as hoping to be able to do some workshops in the city schools around keeping children involved in jazz from the beginning of their musical careers in school, so that they grow up with the idea of this music as an American music. And I'm hoping to be able to introduce that at some time in the next year. I'm working on that proposal as we speak. I'm composing also a larger piece. I'm learning a lot of different things about the aspects of composition, about reworking your older compositions and lengthening them and elongating them and putting pieces in the middle. And now I'm beginning to be involved with some lyrics that are inspirational about things that have happened to me in my own life. And I'd like to incorporate them into the piece so that it becomes more than just music. It becomes a total experience. I worked with a very exciting poet the other night who incorporated into John Coltrane's music some wonderful positive lyrics about peace and humanity and about our need to connect. And so that's the direction that I'm headed, and I'm hoping that this piece, I'm just going to write the piece and then have it ready for presentation, and I think that the spirits will guide me to the right place when it's done.
My goodness, you are so busy. This is wonderful to do your teaching and have the time to compose and to do your writing. Well, let's listen to another tune. And you talked about Super 80. Let's do that now. Let's listen to, from Nothing But Love, Bertha Hope on piano and her group with Super 80. You are in the Jazz Room. I'm your host, Joan Watson Jones. You just heard our guest here in the studio on piano, Bertha Hope, with Super 80, and from her CD, Nothing But Love. And Bertha, now could you? Now's the time to tell everyone how can they find your CD.
So buy it on the internet. It's on Amazon.com. And there are other CDs there that you might be interested in as well, but you can get it there.
Well, thank you so much, Bertha, for coming to the Jazz Room here in Studio 952.
Thank you so much. I am really very honored that you asked me to be a part of this. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Now, we have time for an excerpt from one more tune called, now can you help me with this? Ojos de Rojo.
Yeah. Red Eye. It's about the red eye.
Yes.
Oh.
I thought that was red eye.
Yeah.
I knew it was red eye. I just wanted to pronounce it. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Bertha.
Thank you very much.
Let's listen to Ojos de Rojo. We've come to the end of another show. Thank you for spending time here with us in the Jazz Room. You'll find information and a photo of Bertha on the Jazz Room page of my website, joanwatsonjones.com. We love hearing from you. You may also email us through the website, Jazz Room page of my website. Also, you'll see information about upcoming shows. You have been listening to the Jazz Room. I'm your host, Joan Watson Jones.
The Jazz Room is distributed by M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.